Chapter 8 Tuadan, Selman, Plumbers and Lunch versus Nyssal, Flag, and the Meaning of Everything. I've written you something. Scully, I will turn the pages for you on this. No, there won't be a test afterward. The city's old myths re-examined. The narratives of LGR and fears of the Lich Lord. An essay by me for my friend Scully Fellow so that he will forgive me for leaving him in my pocket all day yesterday. The LGR, or Lich Ghost and Revenant Festival, is not the only celebration of the various cultures within the city. There is Guild Week, Dark Elf Heritage Month, Human Unity Month, Ethereal Week, and the like. The mechs tend to organize weekends around their culture, but do not demarcate a special period of time for specific celebrations. And of course, there are events and festivals associated with the city and various religious groups. The Church of the First Cause puts on a public spectacle, whereas True Path cloisters its events away. But LGR is different. It starts on the first day of Cantor, which coincides with the anniversary of the start of the Great Entropy. And so historical narratives are being invoked more plentifully, and that means, to some extent, different culture groups are competing for space in the public mind. Additionally, LGR, by its nature as a community, is subject to more gatekeeping than others. A vampire is an incarnate, but is clearly part of LGR. And a ghost is an ethereal, but also part of LGR. Is an elven ghost still allowed to be an elf and a ghost? Can you be part of the light elf culture and LGR? What if you don't identify as one? And so on. And additionally, there will simply be a lot of people about because it is the month of the nicest weather in the city. This meant that all eyes were on doing good and welcoming a new year. And so it was also the perfect time for the Guild Gaming Convention. But this year, people feared the coming of the Lich Lord. What they think I am. But to understand this, one must understand the mythical view of history people had of Hraith, as well as what had been shown to be true, misremembered, or utterly false by more recent scholarship, and archaeology around these traditions. Elves and humans had basically the same myths about the founding of the world, other than the fact that they disagreed on the good and bad elements of the creation myth. Hraith was supposed to have arisen when Cat and Doff, space and time, came to the new void after having concluded the last events of the place they were before. In human tradition, Cat and Doff made love to celebrate their arrival on this new world. In dark elf tradition, Doff was tired and so asked Cat to eat them, but let Cat flow through their veins. Pregnant with time or infused with time, space then started to breathe, and from this breath, the sky came. The sky, then unable to make decisions on its own, asked Doff for siblings. And so Doff either cried or urinated the ocean, and either fashioned or defecated the land. Doff then went to sleep to dream of Cat. The sky, the oldest sibling, tried to be a good example to its younger siblings by putting out one big idea for half the day. The sun, and many smaller elegant ideas thereafter, the stars. Sky, ocean, and land found they could whisper to their dreaming parents and new creatures would arise. And so the first people came about. The first people could multiply on their own, and so sky, ocean, and land decided they needed caretakers. And so the gods were made. This is where traditions disintegrate. As to how many gods there were and which were good or bad. The gods wanted the first people to work, play, learn, and rest, in balance. According to elven myths, Rain saw that some of the first people only wanted to rest and play. She made them humans as a punishment. Ask the humans, and Rain saw that some only wanted to learn and rest, but never do. And so they were turned into elves. The implication here is, of course, one's own people are the original model, and the other is bastardized somehow, and such like. Quells cursed the world with death, or gifted the transformation of death so there would be more options for existential states, if you ask the Revenants. Humans, like elves, once had myths to explain how various culture heroes further sundered humans into different types. Pink humans used to believe, for example, that King Rels, the first mythical human king, marked humans with color and gender so he could remember who had what role. But being as pink humans are extinct, this myth is seldom remembered. Both the dark elves and light elves, traditionally in older times at least, believed that the two sisters had been responsible for the cleaving of the elves. In the dark elf version of the tale, the light elves had the earth stripped out of them, leaving them pale and with only ideas but no will or strength to carry them out. And in the light elf version of the story, the dark elves had the light of inspiration removed from them. But like the earlier stories of the bifurcation, the teller is always the original, and the other is the diminished version. The beast folk, which call the elven and human peoples collectively something that translates to naked, children, and without agency in their own tongues, have their stories too about how the naked children lost their adornments. The beast folk have tales of how the cats, werewolves, and snake men separated from each other. But in truth, these stories are kinder. They don't bother having a story for the separation of humans and elves. The beast folk often think the naked children fighting about ear shape and skin shades ridiculous, and use it to identify them all as inherently violent. Or so they did before the time of Ocasella. The truth is, at least as modern scholars know and claim as fact, and are most likely right, that Hraith, like the other planets that orbit the sun, formed in an accretion cloud billions of years ago. And as organic chemicals on the planet interacted with magicka from the sun, entropy tended toward extropy and life formed. They also have argued for years that since nearly all living incarnates can reproduce with each other and the offspring are in turn fertile, they are not even separate races. The academics maintain that not only does common origin propose all incarnate sentients are related, but all biological life on the planet. So, in Ocasella, the old stories are remembered, symbolically and often retold by culture groups to stress how they were made special by the gods or the ancestors. But the less pleasant part about the other being, well, divinely othered, is left off, and people sometimes pretend the sundering myths are less revolting as a result. Then there are the Church of the One, who believe reality is all the dream of a godhead, a wonderful one, and the Church of the First Cause, or Pure Cause, the less radical branch of the same faith, who believe it too, but believe the Godhead, or the conjoined twin Godhead in some branches of the faith, is sickly and schizophrenic and unable to wake, and the goal of life is to separate into a world beyond this one. First Cause's ideology is the origin, whether they would admit it or not, of the spiritual but not religious crowd's notion that magic is not really extropic or probabilistic, but that it is a type of causal and entropic constant not yet understood. Though no serious scholar agrees with this. Scully, I am going full third person here, okay, to be objective. I will make you proud. The Lich Lord is a matter of another order. If the unknown revenant entity is the Lich Lord is in the eye of the beholder. To some, yes, and nothing but yes. But there is little doubt that the unknown was the source of the stories of the Lich Lord. The debate was the accuracy of those stories. But prophecy was part of the legends, and most people doubted prophecy. But as some pointed out, isn't the future sometimes knowable? If one sees a vase falling from a height to a hard surface, will the vase not crack? But the unknown has been in the Everwell for at least 5,000 years, and more likely 10,000 or 20,000 years. This is known because as long as anyone can remember, the ward on the well, seemingly natural, gives off a resonant signature that has been in phase for at least 5,000 years. Until last week, when the unknown did clearly emerge from the well. It was a revenant, and almost surely a lich, and clearly wields a powerful consciousness and a type of magicka. An unknown type, but what else could it be? Now, the unknown has not attacked anyone other than the priests who were going to kill the scholars. But the media doesn't know this fact. Only you and I know that, Scully. So, what is the Lich Lord in the legends supposed to do? Bring the final death, which will sever all revenants and bring an entropy which will end all life and civilization? It was assumed a single consciousness could not direct the fundamental forces to this degree. But the mechs have speculated that if they still had the facility to evolve their forms, so too could they build a being that could bring an entropy. So might one not exist naturally? The legends tell the Lich Lord first came in the Mythic era, about 9,000 years ago. History does not even know for certain if humans and elves had separated by then or not. Tradition says they did, but the stories are found in the oral and legendary history of most of the peoples of Hraith. Interest in this particular legend was not great until the Lich Lord, or the Unknown, emerged a few weeks back. What do you think, Scully? That was a pretty good essay, right? I know, I was pretty proud of it too. But now you know a little bit more than you did a few minutes ago. Let's go visit Tuadan now. He's on his way to meet Selman for coffee. Selman walked into Tuadan's office a bit earlier than their scheduled lunch appointment to find Tuadan in an open-cast telescene call to a dwelling contractor's office as he paced around his office with growing frustration. Currently, he was on hold with some of the most laughably awful lyre music Selman had heard in quite some time. Noticing Selman enter, Tuadan motioned for him to sit. The music stopped abruptly with a gentle tick, and Tuadan almost tripped in surprise. Hello? Hello, sir. Thank you for holding. I understand you have an issue with the bill we sent, asked the woman on the other end of the transmission. Yes, your plumber ended up not doing the work, Tuadan said. Just a minute. I see here you asked him not to work, she said. No, that's not correct. We were going to open a micro-portal behind the wall, and he said he didn't want to work that way and you would send someone else, Tuadan said. Our staff member is a member of the Human Heart Church, sir. He doesn't like to engage in magecraft where handwork can be done, said the woman. I understand. When he told us that, we understood. But when we made the appointment, we were asked if we wanted our walls opened or if we wanted to open a micro-portal. And my spouse said we'd do a portal. I understand why the fellow you sent didn't want to work with a portal, but surely you see someone made a mistake when they sent him to this job, Tuadan said. No mistake, sir. He would have been capable of doing the job with hand tools. You refused, said the woman. I am saying you knew this job would involve a micro-portal, and you sent someone from your team you knew didn't work with portals due to his faith. I am not sure where the problem is, but the job was not one that was to involve our walls opening. The error is yours. I see, said the woman. Sir, I will need to have a shift manager contact you. Fine, said Tuadan. Tuadan closed the scroll and half collapsed, half sat down in his chair, praying to whatever higher forces were available that Selman would go easy on him today. Incompetence, Tuadan said, removing his square-rimmed glasses to massage the pulsing ache that was now screaming across his forehead. Yeah, human heart. Those guys have a lot to do with why your people used to think mine couldn't use magic, said Selman, snorting softly. I didn't mean the guy was at fault, said Tuadan, pleading with no one in particular. The company should have sent someone who was okay with a microportal, said Tuadan. I am a human, and I say it's unreasonable for those guys to expect us not to use magic. They have no problem using magic for travel or healing. It's weird. You would think First Cause wouldn't use magic. They believe crazier stuff. But it's Human Heart who does crazier stuff. Anyway, what you said about Human Heart. My people didn't need help coming up with stereotypes. The elves were already good at that, said Tuadan. And what, humans are better? Light and dark elves just separated. My people? Hell, we enslaved each other based on color palette. You know, just because the Dominion was real and its acts are heinous in history, that doesn't mean elves need to mea culpa all the time to everybody. Were the human anti-elf pogroms any better? Or human-on-human oppression by the Pinks? Said Selman. I don't apologize all the time to everybody, said Tuadan. But you compete, Tuadan, to have the most problematic ancestors. What do you want, your culture to be the worst? Asked Selman. Tuadan furrowed his brow behind his hands, his posture giving the impression of prayer, and issued an extended groan. You're not responsible for what happened before you were born. You are responsible for what you do with your cards and the ones left in the pile by the last set of players. Which brings me to the subject of our lunch, said Selman. Lunch doesn't have a subject, said Tuadan, his voice muffled by his folded hands. Since we've been spending time together, what hasn't had a subject? Asked Selman. Nyssal. You like the kid, I know that, said Selman. She's like your age, said Tuadan. I know, said Selman. No, I mean, wait. I'm not calling you out or anything. But I hate when humans call elves under 60 kids because they look young by human standards. She is a trained archaeologist, and I don't call her a kid because she's an elf and has that fake young thing going on. I call people kid when I'm trying to find them not sexy. I still call my assistant kid because when I first met him, 'cause he is objectively cute, said Selman. Cute is an opinion, so no one is objectively cute. Selman, you are carelessly self-aware. I don't even know what I mean by that, but you are, Tuadan interrupted, truly wishing not to hear any more on this tangent. Okay, my point is you like her, and you also think she can make the campaign work at convention. But you're a whole picture guy, Selman said. Usually I know where you're going with these things, but here I don't, said Tuadan, finally sitting correctly in his chair. His exasperation at his conversation with the woman at the plumbing office finally abating. What I mean is, you know she's going to use it to fund a dig at Drothla for evidence about common origin theory, Selman scoffed. That's her paycheck. What she does with it is up to her, said Tuadan, wiping a few minor fingerprints from his glasses with a bit of his shirt. So you want to distance yourself and the guild from that? Asked Selman, converted from friend to reporter. No, not at all. That was part of my motivation to bring her on. Whole picture, as you said. Why, do you have issue? Asked Tuadan. I don't, said Selman. I think proving common origin for elves, or for like every organic being on this planet, would be fantastic. But you usually nuance every social issue. You over-nuance it, even. You overthink whether you're allowed to have an opinion on things, or who might be offended you didn't disclaimer your thoughts enough because of who they think you are, said Selman. Tuadan replaced his glasses and blinked a few times to reactivate the Accuo charm on his lenses. What do you mean? Selman leaned forward in his chair. Common origin theory bothers a lot of people. And on this, though, you are black and white. I draw the line at finesse with objective truth, said Tuadan. I am surprised to hear you say defining objective truth is easy, said Selman. I didn't. In fact, for us, all of us, it is difficult. Did you ever think about it? Survival skills are not based around it, said Tuadan. Sure. Social cohesion and objective truth are only in bed together on a rare night, said Selman. But look, common origin theory, by some standards, is proven. And I can't rightly see where elves, humans, even beast folk came from, if not from a common ancestor, said Tuadan. I think all biological life on this sphere has common origin, and sentient life, of course, even more recently. Tuadan's mind thrummed at the intellectual escalation. These conversations with Selman were starting to feel normal. Well, I started this conversation around the point that it seems you weren't worried about Nyssal's work deeply offending, say, elves who believe the gods sundered the light and dark elves. That's really important to some elves. Not to mention humans, not me, mind you, who are afraid if we are all just a type of elf. Selman threw out his hand in a tossing motion to illustrate his point. Well, there goes human identity, said Selman. Tuadan paused before speaking, wanting to take caution with his next words. What if I were to tell you that I don't believe in the divinity of the gods? Tuadan paused again, gauging Selman for a reaction. Personally, I really don't see any evidence the gods are anything but very powerful ethereals, or even incarnate mages remembered, or perhaps they're just stories. No realer than the world of Earthgame, said Tuadan. Selman tilted his head upward, unsure how the conversation got here. Well, I don't believe in the gods per se, but the gods are very real to some people. So is causal magica theory. But you see no issue with putting down those believers, said Tuadan, eyes level with Selman's as he leaned forward in his chair. Selman was dangerously close to falling into the intellectual trap Tuadan set. You don't think conservative cultures deserve some respect? Asked Selman. To live and let live, yes. I have no problem with a human or elven traditionalist conducting themselves however they want. You know, by traditions they think came down from the gods. Tuadan was surprised to find how easy it was to speak his direct thoughts, undiluted. Tuadan smiled slightly. It appears that Selman's intellectual habits were rubbing off on him. Tuadan continued. If they think they get to oppose equal participation in life, society, whatever you want to call it, then no, said Tuadan. Do you? Tuadan watched Selman closely for an emotional response, instinctively knowing he was getting close to the true Selman's thoughts. Do I what? Asked Selman, boldly evasive. Do you think that any group's rights include having the right to tell another group how to live? Asked Tuadan, desperate to keep the intellectual hunger out of his voice. Do I think that deity traditionalists have a right to oppress others? No, not at all. But elected officials tell us how to live, said Selman, still attempting to deflect. You know that's not what I mean, said Tuadan, refusing to give Selman an inch. Anyway, I was complimenting you on how much I thought you were good to take a stand and back Nyssal's research without condition, said Selman, mildly dazed to be on the receiving end of one of his own interrogation tactics. Thank you, said Tuadan, relaxing into his chair again. You know, the two of us don't need to agree on everything. He didn't get the response he truly wanted, but to see Selman frazzled at the end of one of their conversations was reward enough. There is a lot we don't agree on, but some things more than others, it seems, said Selman. Steak with salad? Asked Selman. Steak with salad, said Tuadan. One thing they did agree on, Scully, was that real food was red meat and leafy plants. They weren't grain guys. As Tuadan and Selman got up to leave for lunch, Nyssal was with Flag at the Orange Lantern, and they had finished eating. Nyssal was trying to focus on what Flag was saying, but part of her was thinking about how there was a substantial amount of sauce from her sandwich left on the plate. If she was home, she could lick it off the plate. Oh, don't judge Nyssal, Scully. Lots of people do it, very few admit to it. Why can't fictional races ever be fictional? Asked Flag. Come again? Asked Nyssal. They always have to represent someone in the real world. That's why I said fictional races. A character can just be a character, said Flag. I know some people always want a fictional race to represent something. But they can be a plot device too, no? Yeah, I guess. Like the builders in the Homeworld books. But even there, people say the builders represent how the mechs see the rest of their civilization before they were separated from them, said Flag. Sure, and to someone it does mean something, but a fictional race can be its own thing. It doesn't have to always be representative. In Earth Game, it's different. For instance, there are plenty of ancient civilizations mentioned in the lore that we've never actually met. Like, you're not going to tell me the Sumerians are supposed to be drawn from a real-world group. They're just world-building, Nyssal said. Nyssal was operating under the assumption Flag was frustrated by the fact that there was all this buzz as convention was approaching that indicated a fictional construction in fantasy was only worthy if a fictional parallel represented and examined a particular group. She was half right. Flag was rather put out by the perceived restrictions on his own imagination. He played these games to leave the real world, not continue to be restricted by it. But the current socio-political climate surrounding LGR and convention had little to do with those emotions. I know you like Earth Game, but your favorite is Star Spaces, right? Nyssal asked. Yes, said Flag, dejectedly examining the wood grain of their table. You know I do like that game too. All the species in it are fictional, right? Asked Nyssal. Yes, said Flag, finally picking up his head. In fact, they aren't even from popular fiction. The guild that puts it out invented all the civilizations, people, and creatures for that game. Sure, it resembles stuff we've seen, but it's all original, said Flag. Flag, what is this about? Asked Nyssal, recognizing the emotional weight around him. Flag resumed picking at the table's wood grain, unable to face her. I'm unhappy, Nyssal. I am unhappy with life. I'm at the point where it sometimes feels like I'm just living to live, and I wonder if I wouldn't be happier as an ethereal, said Flag. Nyssal's face flushed with panic, flashing back to her own attempted disincarnation. But Flag, not everyone becomes a ghost as far as we know, said Nyssal, desperate to keep the panic from her voice. I know they do, what do they call it? Early disincarnation in Quell, she said. Chosen disincarnation. And that's not what I'm talking about. I just want to do right by people, you know? I do. I don't want to discriminate or hurt anyone because of what they are, you know? Flag ran a hand through his hair, trying to brush away his heavy thoughts. It's just with LGR coming, I'm sick of all these opinions. Some people's hurts are more valid than others, you know? And the Lich Lord or whatever it is? Flag paused, unsure if he should voice his next thought. What if it ends it all? Is that good? Bad? Nyssal fell back against her seat, exhaling loudly with relief. She watched as her friend continued to absently pick at the table and leaned forward, her voice warm and gentle. What brought this on, Flag? Asked Nyssal. On the Star Spaces metaboard, I started to give my opinion that, maybe there was value in the races in Star Spaces not being anything, 'cause it could let you escape. He continued. Earth game, the whole premise, at least now that your friend is in charge, is about representation and I like it. But what about my life experience as someone who hates existing? Where is my validity? Where is my right to just escape? Flag said, eyes pleading for an answer he knew Nyssal could not give. Nyssal only knew how to make a facial expression and sigh. She wasn't good with these things. Now you'll wonder, Scully, how Nyssal and Flag got onto this. Do these people ever talk about what they did the night before? They do. But why would I tell you that? Weeks ago, Nyssal read an article sent to her on Earthgame. It was a scholarly article examining why some players gatekeep access to different groups for representation of real-world groups. Why and why some oppose it. She had been inspired by reading the academic article and met with a friend from school, a mech named 3412. 34 had actually been her writing instructor, and she wrote to him a few days prior, asking if they could meet. They had become friends and played several 4i campaigns together. 34 had been one of the few friends she would meet with when she was recovering from the hallucinatory incidents. He was the first real mech friend she had. She caught him up on the last several months and said she wanted to ask him a few philosophical details. The pair agreed to meet at their old stomping grounds in the Orange Lantern, choosing a more private corner booth away from a rather lively crowd enjoying a vigorous skirmish in warring states a few tables over. Adjusting her body against the comfortably worn, oversized cushions, Nyssal placed her order with the waitstaff before turning to 34. Nyssal touched her lips thoughtfully, searching for the appropriate words. You have memories of the ship and before? She asked. Yes, said 34, the gentle amber light of his optical sensors flickering as he accessed the remnants of his deep memory cores. Vague ones. Very vague ones. So, just to explain, my bony bud, the mechs had all lost most of their memory cores when passing through Horaith's solar system. It was generally believed that that was what had thrown their ship off course, because of the way a mech's sentient systems were arranged. Their core persona and ego couldn't really be lost except under extreme conditions. However, portions of their episodic memory could, and indeed most had. 34 had some memories of before. Not enough to answer the big questions about where mechs came from and everything they must have known about other spheres. But in his own words, he had chosen a male identity once on Horaith. Sometimes enough to recall the essence of how things were. Though he was cautious that almost anything could be confabulation. 34 had devoted his life to being an academic for the last few centuries and tried to help people see things from an outside perspective. But lately realized he was not, of course, any more or less outside in perspective than anyone else. "Do you remember?" Nyssal started, not sure she had chosen the right words. "Do you remember if Max, when it was just, your people?" She said. "Let me stop you there." 34 held up a hand for emphasis, briefly freezing as his neural processors accessed the data. "One of the things I recall is that other than during voyages between places, it was rarely just my people. I don't think being thrust into a new set of cultures and a new world was, well, new to us." 34 adjusted his optical sensors to projection, and a hazy, heavily distorted image of a gently spinning sphere appeared in the air between them. "Just that when we got to Heraith, it was where we were going to be." The air caught in Nyssal's lungs at the rare sight of Heraith in a view beyond the stars, a sight very few scholars could lay claim to seeing. The projection quickly faded, the extent of the memory spent. You mean voyages between spheres?" Nyssal's voice came out in a breathless whisper. "Yeah, and also, I feel like we didn't just go to spheres. I could be wrong, but I feel we used to go to constructed spaces," he said, deeper parts of his anatomy whirring and clicking rhythmically. "Like a space station?" She fumbled with the words, pulling from in-universe 5i concepts. "Well, not so much like a space station like one would find in 5i, but what one would find in the movies and books people in 5i would read about their imagined future," he said, making space as the waiter arrived with Nyssal's order. Nyssal thanked the server and found herself still smiling at 34's use of the word movie. He'd read enough of the 5i lore guide released prior to the game system itself to throw the term around, knowing she would get it without an overly cumbersome real-world metaphor. 34 repositioned his body and continued. "Back to the space stations. You could say they are similar in concept, but they..." 34's eyes flickered again as he attempted to piece the data together. "They seemed bigger than that. I remember ships conjoining with each other, temporarily, like a marketplace in space. I remember liking that," he said, the light in his eyes growing slightly with the remembered emotions. "And organic incarnates. More beings like that than other mechs. Were there ethereals?" she asked, taking a slow sip of her coffee, relishing the warmth. "I think so. But I think out there, ethereals and revenants regarded themselves and were regarded very differently than here. But you know organics were too." 34 refocused his eyes onto Nyssal. "I went over all this when you took my class. Didn't I?" "Yeah," she said, smiling. "But it wasn't this personal. This adds another dimension to it." 34 slightly increased the volume of his voice, signaling a subject change. "Well, I've talked far too much about my stuff. I don't like a conversation where the other person just listens and interrogates." 34 refocused his optical sensors onto Nyssal, the eyes actuating like an imager shutter. "I'd like to skip to how you're doing. But with you, my friend, this is a preamble to something you want to ask. So I suppose we had best dispense with that," he said, tilting his head to denote interest. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath to steel herself. "What I was leading up to was how did you balance causality and magica out there?" Taking a microsecond to process, 34 began to respond, his voice stilting with a gentle synthetic pastiche before normalizing into a more natural tone. Well, much the same as we think of it here, I believe. 34 paused momentarily as he indexed the proper words to illustrate his point. To us, it's the forces we can directly control and partially control, and both reliably and partially predict. 34 raised his hand to punctuate his words, a habit he long ago picked up from other organics. Magic lets us influence things that just direct causal action can't, or can't yet. But it's never going to be as A to B to C. 34 rotated his wrist 360 degrees, continuing to emote through motion. Sure, if you conjure a 3-hour mage light, it's going to make 3 hours of light at a certain intensity for 3 hours. But even that is only in the city's magneto-magical light grid. Out in the woods, you'll get some amount of light for some time. And even then, sometimes not. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the expression a bum light, he said. No one says that anymore. Nyssal took another sip from her oversized mug, smiling. I do, he said petulantly. But we don't make meaning out of it the same way you do, he said, motioning first to himself, then to Nyssal. Nyssal froze, puzzled by the response. Sensing the shift, 34 altered his speech pattern into a more teacherly mode. Okay. First cause. Try to make order out of existence by insisting magic is causal. And you and the other Earth Game players imagine resolving issues in a totally predictable world. But I don't think my character's world is predictable. 34 paused for emphasis. Whether you live on Earth or Heraeth, there are things you can and cannot control. 34 looked up, noting Nyssal's rapt attention, and continued. There are things you choose to control externally and others you choose to control your reaction. I'm not saying we should just go with the flow of the universe. Sometimes we need to will a change in the world. But if you could adjust your control level, 34 focused a small bit of magic between his hands and produced a small light orb to illustrate. With a quick rotation of a wrist, 34 dissipated the magicka back to its natural ambient state around them. 34 refocused his optical sensors back on Nyssal. How would more control inform your identity? How much control would you exert before you are no longer living it? Would you become its godhead, so to speak? Would you extend the control to other beings' thoughts? And how long before it simply becomes a story no one else can read? A godhead. She lowered her voice, feeling oddly sacrilegious even repeating the word. 34's eyes brightened. Yes. I think it's about balancing all these forces, whether it's the universal constants or your own thoughts and modes of being, 34 said. A godhead could invite another godhead to read its story. Nyssal could feel the synapses fire across her brain, making several new connections, feeling something start to unlock inside her mind. 34's voice came out with an almost audible smile as he watched the beginnings of an epiphany sparkle in Nyssal's eyes. And if the other godhead didn't like your story, would you rewrite them so they did? And then the multiverse would be a story no one would ever read but you. Nyssal found her connection and locked down on the thought with a primal ferocity. We do grieve stories, don't we? She said, her mouth almost tripping over her thoughts. If someone loses their lover or a friend dies, the grief isn't that moment. That loss will still be there tomorrow and the day after, she said. 34 nodded. We grieve loss not only in the moment, but the continuation of that loss into the future, he continued. A future that surely will come, but is not here yet, and hence is a story. 34 let the moment breathe between them, basking in the afterglow of a successful knowledge exchange. As the moment faded, 34 pivoted the subject once again. So, Tuadan Apolloc, what are you going to do with his product? Get people to admit LGR is awesome and good as a festival. but is also dripping with fakeness and construction. Get them to stop fearing the Lich Lord? He asked. It was Nyssal's turn to pause. I was going to prime them for the idea that even if common origin is proven true, which is what I will do with my dig, it doesn't change who they are here or now. Maybe, she said. You haven't even picked your other players yet, have you? 34 teased. No, she said, hiding behind another large gulp of coffee.